Moving along, the mainstream media may have completely moved on from Joe Biden's Afghanistan disaster, but the aftermath is still being felt to this day. Marine Lieutenant Colonel Col Scheller pleaded guilty to 6 charges in military court today after he publicly criticized military officials' handling of the troop withdrawal, which led to the deaths of 13 U.S. service members. The judge presiding over the case has accepted Scheller's plea agreement and is expected to give the Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran little punishment, ruling that the maximum sentence will be a letter of reprimand and forfeit some of his monthly pay for up to a year. The 17-year Marine is expected to be demoted and receive an honorable discharge unless superiors to the judge reject the sentence and the ruling. Our next guest, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, testified during Scheller's court-martial. Colonel Shaffer, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Jen, great to join you. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us about your testimony and what you make of the judge's ruling?
Sure. Look, my job as a witness was to present justification for Colonel Scheller's comments. We all agreed that this was not the most artful way of presenting facts that relate to a wholesale failure of his chain of command. And since I know most of the folks involved, I served under Brigadier General Austin when he was in command in Afghanistan. I know Mark Milley. I understand by the fact that I actually advised a lot of folks, to include Mike Pompeo, on the plan. So I had context for what Colonel Scheller had to say. So I simply tried to provide essentially a policy and operational understanding for the court and the judge to understand that he was completely, very clearly justified in saying that while he is stepping up and accepting responsibility for what he's accused of, he's pleading guilty. These other members of the military, uniformed members, are not doing anything to account for their own mistakes. In some cases, I think dereliction of duty. Some of the things he was accused of doing, they did, to include Mark Milley. And so Stu, at this point, Colonel Scheller, is the only one who is being punished for anything that happened regarding the Afghanistan debacle.
That's right. And, you know, Colonel, we have received a copy of Scheller's prepared closing remarks. I'd like to read you a part of that and get your reaction. He says, quote, "My calls for revolution were always about changing the system, a system that centralizes power and fails to hold senior leaders accountable, a system that will immediately turn on you if you speak out." What do you make of those words? He says this in a number of ways throughout the 19 pages of these closing remarks. I mean, what's your reaction?
Well, very clearly, one of the things I said under oath during my testimony is that what Colonel Scheller did is no different than what Mark Milley did. Mark Milley, instead of going to the media, going to the social media, he went to the media. He actually talked to individuals who allowed him to speak his belief, his version of things, without any permission of the chain of command, to include President Trump back when he was doing his thing behind the scenes. So there's fundamentally no difference between Mark Milley spouting off, trying to shape a narrative, and Colonel Scheller trying to do it. They're both members of the uniformed services, but again, Colonel Scheller is the one who's being held accountable, not Mark Milley. So it's very clear that if you got a few stars and you're politically connected, it's absolutely correct what Scheller's saying. The amalgamation of power in certain places basically precludes any accountability for one's own mistakes. And that's what he said. I agree with him 110%.
Do you foresee any changes going forward within the military as a result of this situation?
Jen, I don't know. Look, I was a whistleblower. I presented other whistleblowers 10 years ago who were Lieutenant Colonel who actually came forward. Danny Davidson actually said that members of the military, the Pentagon, were using psychological operations to convince members of Congress to continue the war in Afghanistan. That didn't go anywhere. So the problem is that we don't have an adequate system for accountability at the senior officer level. These guys come in, get all sorts of medals. And think about this, Jen. These guys all got great medals, great promotions, retire, go off to corporate America, and never once are they held accountable for the amalgamated failures over the last 18, 20 years in Afghanistan. Think about that. Only Colonel Scheller. It's a travesty.
Yeah, and certainly America would like to see General Milley be held accountable along with others. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to have you.
Great. Thank you, Jen.
Have you noticed that as everything around you seems to decline, one thing still grows? It is the power of your rulers. None of their plans and directives have solved your problems or made your life better. The only result has been their increased control over you at the cost of your freedom. Do you know why? You gave them the power.